What if baseball was more than numbers? What if it was about the heroes, the chaos, the heartbreak? That's the Baseball Book Club, the podcast where each week we dig into the unbelievable stories that built America's pastime. Forgotten legends, wild personalities, the moments that never made the box score. If you love baseball or just a great story, pull up a chair and start listening to the Baseball Book Club today. Find us on any podcast platform. So before I read this chapter, Leroy, I thought about the two guys that we're going to be talking about today, and I was like, wow, we're going to have a freaking lot to go over with both of these guys. And that's exactly how Poznanski starts off the Pete Rose chapter. I mean, just so much meat on the bones with both of these guys' careers.
Well, and both, I think it's interesting and apropos to lump them together in that they were both controversial in their own right.
Yeah, that's a great point. Both of them lightning rods for the media, and clearly not without their own controversies. And, we'll get into all that. So let's start with Pete Rose. And one thing we've mentioned in previous episodes is how sometimes scouts will miss on players.
Yeah.
And Pete Rose was one of those guys that I think the scouts would have missed on. Remember how we talked about Mike Piazza, and he had someone on the inside that helped him get a shot in Tommy Lasorda. Well, it was Pete Rose's uncle, who was a part-time scout for the Reds, that got the Reds to take a look at him. But without his uncle, I mean, he just didn't have the raw goods. And so without his uncle, Pete Rose never gets a shot. I mean, what do you think, Leroy?
No, I don't think he does. I think it was interesting the way Poznanski presents the beginning of the whole chapter on Rose, which is like, obviously you played Little League and so did I, right? At what point did you, because we all had dreams. I mean, wanted to be an astronaut when I was 6. And then, I realized I wasn't going to be. But at what point, when you were 11 or 12 or 13 or a teenager or in high school, at what point did you realize, oh, the dream is over? Like I have the realization that I whatever it takes to be a major leaguer, I don't have it.
Yeah, well, for me, it was basketball. Okay, I played a little bit of baseball when I was younger, but basketball was the sport that I excelled at up to a point. And that point came in my freshman year in high school. I mean, I was pretty good in 8th grade. I won some awards at my school. It did well. But, man, everything turned on a dime when I got to high school. All of a sudden, the talent pool got significantly better. And I had maxed out. I reached my ceiling, and everyone around me was getting better, and I was like, well, I guess this is it.
Yeah, so you entered a whole different level of competition, and then that's when reality sunk in.
Yep, it hit hard, too. Reality slapped me across the face, and I didn't even bother trying out my sophomore year. What about you? What was that like?
Well, I would say probably baseball. It's the sport that I played the longest. But, it always felt like the coach's kid got the most reps, got got the only chances, I mean.
Were you a coach's kid?
No, I wasn't a coach's kid. And I'll tell you how I was as as a little leaguer. I was notoriously slow starter. Every year I forgot how to hit until about a third to half of the way through the season, and I was down 7th or 8th in the order. And by that time, my older brother started coaching me in the backyard, and I just started to rip. So every season, I played 4 or 5 years of Little League. Every season, I was just ripping the cover off the ball the last half of the season. But the first season, I was strikeout king of my own right. So, but yeah, I did have, Poznanski mentions, you realize there's some point in your Little League career that you're afraid of the ball. Like maybe you got hit and you never dig in quite as deep, or maybe you're out there and you've committed enough errors and humiliated yourself, and you're kind of secretly hoping, please don't hit it to me. Please don't hit it to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like Moneyball when David Justice is talking to Scott Hatteberg, who's learning how to play first base, and he's like, so Scott, what's your biggest fear? And Hattie's like, a ball being hit to me.
Perfectly. Yeah, and that's what's fun about that, in Moneyball, that everybody relates to, please don't hit it to me. But Pete Rose was not that kid. He was seemingly unaware of his limitations.
Yeah, he didn't have that self-awareness attribute that most people have.
No. There was some point, and we'll get into it, but there was some point later in the career that I heard that the psychological diagnosis of Pete Rose was oppositional defiance disorder. Have you ever heard of that before?
No, I
Some
haven't.
psycho.
ODD.
Yeah, ODD.
It's odd.
Oh, he's odd, all right. But that might just be a, accommodating excuse for explaining why Pete was the way he is. But like a more basic way to, and this might even sound melodramatic, but Pete Rose was kind of psychotic. Completely unaware of his limitations.
Well, he was wired differently, right? I mean, you have to be so obtuse and so unaffected by criticisms from everyone and just plow through like you were meant to be there.
Yeah, just a pathological determination. His father had a boy, and his father said, I'm going to have a ball player. And I don't know if you just speak things into existence and you create an expectation. I mean, for every story, there is like Pete Rose or Mike Piazza of the guy who's absolutely determined, even though it's against the odds. I mean, there's got to be 100,000 other stories of people who thought that too. Every rock star will say, well, you don't want it enough. If you really want to make it in metal, you've got to absolutely believe in it. And that all sounds fine and good, but there's no way that works for everybody. There's a lot of people who but Pete Rose had it.
Well, it's ingredients, right? I mean, sure, some of it is having an insatiable drive, but some of it is innate. You're born with something that others don't have, because there's no way that everyone can become a Major League Baseball player or a rock star just by wanting it bad enough. That's not enough. There's more ingredients than just desire.
Yeah. And Pete Rose cared about baseball, but like Poznansky says, geez, maybe he cared too much. And you can see that manifest itself in other areas of his life, which of course we'll get into.
Right. And part of that, having whatever it was that Pete had, it was part blessing because it gave him such a drive to be great. But then part of it is also destructive.
Oh, yeah. It's a mania. That's why I said it's almost like a psychotic pathology, and how can you approach... how can you have that kind of personality and in some way not have a massive narcissistic element to yourself?
Oh, no doubt. And that's how he closes out this chapter, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But I felt like Pete Rose was such a strange dichotomy. He was so full of himself, so egocentric, to the point where he had Hit King embroidered into every one of the collars of his shirts.
Oh, yeah.
But then he also would make time to have conversations with not only, the everyday people that wanted to approach him, but also he would invest the time into young players, as they'd come up, and he wanted to teach them how to improve their game. How does somebody do both of those? Because usually when you have someone with such a big ego, they don't usually have the time for the little guys.
It's just an obsession. And it's hard to say, and the truth is always in between, is what I've learned later in life, that no matter what it is you think, however harshly you judge somebody or how you deify them as as a hero, there's always a give and take between the bad and the good, because we're all human beings, and if you're going to be the type of human being who's incredibly successful at one thing, it takes other things from your life.
Absolutely.
So at the ground level, really, when we talk about Pete Rose, and one of the appeals of Pete Rose Pete Rose was not my dad's favorite baseball player, but as a Ohio kid, Pete Rose was probably my dad's second favorite player. The player that I knew the most or heard the most about from my dad, because my dad was from Ohio, and so was Pete Rose. He was a local boy east of Cincinnati, and not being a blue chip prospect, or not, being the big slugger or this, that, whatever, that's the reason that Pete Rose sprinted to first base and always backed up the play regardless of how routine it looked, and always ran out if he was going to play left field or play to second base or whatever. It was always the sprint, because it was the intensity and the almost you saw that movie Rudy, the Notre Dame football.
Yeah, of course.
Kind of the same thing as there's a heroic aspect that really kind of moves all of us, especially as Americans, of the undersized average run-of-the-mill underdog kid who makes it from just sheer work ethic and sheer will. I mean, that's kind of the American spirit embodied. The aristocracy of Europe gives way to the American spirit post-revolution and the pioneer spirit of this rugged individualism in which it doesn't matter what your parents left you and it doesn't matter what aristocracy or hierarchy from, but you can come to America and be a self-made man just depending upon how much you want it and how hard you're willing to work. And so it's kind of part of the American mythology, guys like Pete Rose, and especially that he's a hometown hero that is not just some guy from Jersey or Los Angeles here in Cincinnati, but he's one of us, which makes him a folk hero immediately as soon as he gains success. Of course, as much as he was revered and loved by the local fan base and baseball fans abroad, his teammates, not so much.
Incredible, right? But you have to remember, this is typical human behavior when a new guy shows up and he's threatening to take your job or your teammate's job, and he's out hustling you, maybe showing you up a little bit. If you're stepping on toes, that's not a popular place to be.
Yeah.
But, eventually he earned his teammates' respect. Granted, he did butt heads with a lot of guys, but Frank Robinson was one of the guys that really took Pete under his wing, and they spent a lot of time together, developed a close friendship, and Pete learned a lot from Frank.
Oh, absolutely. Especially reading a lot of these chapters where this is not the only chapter that I've heard that Frank Robinson had reached out and been a mentor and a pivotal player or peer or a manager for that matter for multiple baseball players. But yeah, that Robinson kind of, like you said, took Rose under his wing, especially in a time where there was a lot of players and managers who kind of resented Pete Rose. And why did they resent Pete Rose? Because he was a tryhard and he was too intense.
Yeah, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Even guys in the other dugout. Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford are the guys that gave him his Charlie Hustle nickname because of the way he would run down to first on a walk.
Yeah, which of course Pete Rose embraced. But it was a heckle. Like Charlie Hustle, that was supposed to be a put down.
Yeah, but not for Pete.
Yeah, well, he wasn't, what was it, Scooter? That's what his original nickname.
Yeah, what kind of a nickname is that?
Yeah, well, that's mess up your hair and give you a nudge, little guy, and call you Scooter. He resented that. So as soon as he got Charlie Hustle, he embraced it and made it his own. And everybody loves the Charlie Hustle,
But again, Charlie Hustle meant as an insult. But Pete being Pete, he embraces it. And it just goes along with the whole persona that he embodied of not having that self-awareness.
Yeah. I'm going to take it on and I'm going to make it my own. And before you know, it's a compliment. Of course, Pete Rose, he was obsessive about baseball. The story that Poznanski tells is it wasn't just, batting practice, fielding practice, talk baseball, listen to baseball, play the game as hard as you can, but it was drive home and sit in your driveway listening to AM radio trying to catch all the West Coast games.
Dude, this part really bummed me out because Poznanski took the cynical approach on this. And so here I was having this romanticized notion about how much Pete loved the game that he couldn't get enough of it. And he'd drive home from after a long day at the ballpark. And then he'd sit in his driveway listening to the West Coast games on his car radio. And it painted this picture in my mind. And, maybe I was naive or maybe Poznanski was just too cynical to immediately jump to the dark side. But before he ever mentioned it, it didn't dawn on me that Pete might have been checking the scores to see how his betting was going. And that totally ripped my heart out of my chest in that moment.
Yeah, I know. I thought the same thing. I'm like, oh, man. And then you can kind of see the obsessive hell that, because you don't turn a mind like that off.
No, you got to keep active.
Busy, go, grind, think, analyze, grit your teeth. You can't turn that off. You can't turn that adrenaline off. And that's why, archetypically, there's a lot of ball players or a lot of athletes in general who develop substance abuse problems. It seems like rock and rollers is because the adrenaline and the high of, having a high energy performance with thousands of people, clinging to your every move. It's just you go back to normal life and all of a sudden it seems kind of limp and flaccid and empty.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, I feel like once you've experienced that big crowd adoration of a rock star or a professional athlete, you eventually become numb to that type of adrenaline rush, and you need something new, like a new fix with, like they say with hard drugs, you get used to a certain amount, and you have to up the dosage to feel that euphoria.
Yeah, and obviously, as we know, and this is the segue I think we're making with Pete Rose, it was gambling.
Yes. Yep.
So, making the segue into that, we kind of covered that he was a quick, fast player. 3.7 seconds to first. That's pretty quick.
It's very quick. It's on par with some of the fastest on record. For example, Byron Buxton.
Buxton, yeah. Well, and think about it too. We're talking what, the mid to late 60s?
Yep.
There's no protein powder. There's no, this is back in the day where it was a smoke and a beer and let's get to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that was, for the early part of Pete Rose's career, that was kind of his claim to fame, is that he could make a lot of singles doubles just by, being tenacious on running the bases and just being lightning quick. Of course, we remember the Pete Rose, at least I do, that was a little bit more overweight and kind of just concentrating on getting that bloop single to keep on racking up. Now, like I mentioned, my dad, being a Cincinnati Reds fan, loved Pete Rose. And there was a lot of disappointment there, but, going into the gambling thing, which I think we're going to get into, it was always interesting to see the way my dad bargained with the gambling scandal.
Right. It's tough, to face hard truths when it comes to someone that you're used to looking up to. And so, you try and navigate as a bystander information that comes in, and you try to see the best or the good in someone and hope that some of what's coming in, maybe it's wrong, or, maybe you try and look the other way on something depending on what it is. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, well, okay, like for instance, everybody's got their own matrix of morality, but I think we spoke about Steve Garvey at some point. My dad was an inner city policeman in Los Angeles, and gosh, there was one point where Steve Garvey, he was the big hero. He was the clean-cut American guy that really cared about the game and played the game right, and then I remember there was one point in the 80s where I loved Steve Garvey, and all of a sudden, Dad didn't anymore. Oh, that dirtbag Steve Garvey. And it was like, well, what's the matter with Steve Garvey? Well, my dad had understood through channels that Steve Garvey was a bit of a philanderer. And so, in my dad's morality matrix, cheating on your wife was something that he would completely reject. That kind of betrayal was something he would just completely reject another human being for. But then you look at Pete Rose, and I remember my dad saying about Pete Rose, what's the big deal? He bet on his own team. He didn't bet against his team. He was just being a competitor. And I could see my dad in 1989, whenever you talk to him about it,
wrestling with it.
Yeah, kind of having to bargain with is this really wrong? Or is this just kind of a technicality? Or is still trying to preserve kind of desperately almost his want or his need to have kind of his, have his baseball hero morally intact.
Yeah, you don't want to see your guy get knocked off the pedestal.
Well, yeah. And for all the other reasons, too, that I mentioned, the legend of Pete Rose and how he appealed to the local guy and to the that's the success story that we all want to be a part of, is that the cosmic justice is that if you put enough into it and you want it hard enough and you try hard enough, that everyone's going to live happily ever after. And the ugly, like we've already mentioned, the ugly underside of that is that, oh, but people who have that psychological makeup are tortured in ways that, like I said, the truth is somewhere in between. And I think Poznanski is somewhat generous with Pete Rose to an extent. And we can talk about that. But what were you going to say, segueing into the whole gambling scandal, which I think is we're getting at, right?
We are, yeah. And I was going to say that, he had a chance to make it right. Giamatti, the commissioner of baseball at the time.
Yeah, Bart Giamatti.
Yeah, Giamatti was giving him a lot of opportunities, and had Rose played it a different way, taking the path of humility, this whole saga never gets drawn out the way it had. But for all the attributes that Pete Rose had, he wasn't able to do that.
Yep, that's exactly right. Now, if you don't understand or know or remember the timeline of generally how it happened, in February of 1989, Commissioner of Baseball Peter Ueberroth, who got the job because he was the organizer of the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. So that was Pete Ueberroth's big claim to fame that got him the baseball commissioner's job. So in February of 89, Peter Ueberroth got the drop that the New York Times was going to have a story.
That's right.
About Pete Rose and gambling. And this is something that was kind of on the low-level radar of Major League Baseball for some time. And so in order for the league to get ahead of the story, Peter Ueberroth kind of jumped in and said, we're going to launch our own investigation against Pete Rose, right?
Yeah, because they didn't really have much of a choice at that point.
Right.
The Times going public was going to give baseball a black eye, so they wanted to get out in front of it and make it look like they were on it.
Exactly. And so in April of that year, by the time the 1989 season started, Bart Giamatti was the commissioner of baseball.
Yep. Ueberroth was the commissioner only for 5 years, and he actually stepped down early. He was under contract through that 1989 season, but he left just as the season was about to begin, like you just said. And he cited personal reasons, but you have to wonder if there's more to that story, especially as this Pete Rose fiasco is about to break loose. And I'm just speculating, but I don't know. Maybe he just didn't want to deal with that.
No. And then so Bart Giamatti takes over, who is an intellectual. He's a sensitive man. He's, a great baseball commissioner, very patient.
And he loves the history of the game. He's probably kind of like us in a way where the past has a lot of value.
Yes, is a man who loves the game, who wants to be a legendary commissioner along the lines of Kennesaw Mountain Landis, and, that he wants to be a great steward of the game. And so Bart Giamatti, who incidentally, sometimes people know or don't know, if you know the actor Paul Giamatti,
yeah,
who's in a lot of Hollywood films.
I know who Paul Giamatti, were they related?
No, they are actually. Paul Giamatti is Bart Giamatti's son. So if you've ever seen the movie Sideways.
You're kidding me.
Or, Paul Giamatti is Bart Giamatti's son.
I never knew that.
Yeah. I'm glad I could blow your mind.
Yeah, that did.
Yeah, I blew mine when I heard it. But at any rate, so Bart Giamatti, he wants to handle this as fairly and as sensitively as possible. He doesn't want to embarrass Pete Rose. He doesn't have a grudge. He just wants this to be fair and good and accountable, and he just wants this to go away and for Pete's favor, for Pete's benefit as much as the game's benefit. But unfortunately, he was dancing with a psychopath with Rose.
Yeah. And so going back to what I was saying, Pete was given plenty of chances with Giamatti, but Pete would not play ball the way he had to make things right.
Yeah, Bart made him the deal that, hey, look, you come in, admit that you betted on baseball, we'll suspend you for a year, it'll be done, it'll be over, and then we can move on. And of course, that's the rule, is if the Major League Baseball rule is if they catch you betting on baseball, it's only a 1 year
suspension, and then you're back in after 1 year.
Yeah, if I play for the Dodgers and I'm betting on the Pirates games, they're going to kick me out for a year and then they're going to bring me back in. But if you're betting on your own team,
that's right, and that stems back to the 1919 World Series, right?
Yeah, the 1919 Black Sox scandal is the problem that they're trying to isolate and protect.
Sure, the integrity of the game. And we all know, Say It Ain't So Joe, Shoeless Joe Jackson, banned, at least was banned from the game. And if they catch you, they'll throw you out of the game until you're dead. And then once you're gone, they'll lift the ban.
Yeah.
At least if you have a commissioner like Rob Manfred.
So that's the death sentence that can happen. And Bart Giamatti is trying to damage control and say, look, Pete, just come in here, work with us. We'll make it simple. Just admit you did something wrong and you're a changed man and you're going to be better. It'll be a bit of a PR problem for you for 1 year. We'll get done with it and you can be back into playing baseball. And of course, the oppositional defiance disorder that I explained earlier really kicks in because no, I'm going to fight you. In fact, I'm going to sue the league. In fact, I'm going to, which he didn't need to do.
No.
But once again, that competitive spirit that keeps Pete Rose up at 11:45 at night listening to West Coast baseball games in his car on the radio.
Yeah, that competitive drive to impose his will and to just keep on fighting.
It really, really set him back in this whole scenario.
And amazingly, Giamatti was willing to bury the real truth about Rose betting on his team. I mean, he knew Rose was doing that, but even still, he was willing to just give him a slap on the wrist, get the whole thing over with, move past it, with Pete Rose not having a permanent ban.
Yes.
And then the unthinkable happens for Pete Rose. The one guy who was willing to give Pete a break, Bart Giamatti, dies suddenly.
Yeah, he dies, and he's, Pete Rose and his legal team, which you got to wonder if his legal team had misadvised and misled Pete, or whether or not Pete bullied his legal team into submission to perform the way he wanted to. But one way or another, his whole team miscalculated how bad this could be, how bad it could turn out, how he wasn't going to win. They just overestimated their position. And by the time Giamatti passes away, and Fay Vincent, who's a friend of Bart Giamatti's, who you can only imagine is a little resentful that Bart Giamatti is being, bless him, but a pushover. Fay Vincent has a very draconian, punitive attitude towards Pete Rose.
Oh, hard line. Fay Vincent comes in and lowers the boom right away.
Yeah, that's right. August 24th, 1989, Fay Vincent creates an indefinite ban.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have come to misunderstand the judgment that was set against him. It was not a lifetime ban that ends when Pete Rose dies, which has subsequently now been removed after he did die. But it was originally intended to be a forever ban.
Yeah, you're not banned for life. Which, and Poznansky even mentions, well, that's kind of a cruel dynamic anyways, is to die. And
I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, Leroy, I don't feel that way. If I knew that I had a lifetime ban on me that ends with my death, I'd be okay knowing that even though I don't live to see it, I'm going to be reinstated, maybe even enter the Hall of Fame posthumously. Having that reassurance before I died would be better than being unsure about it at all, I think.
Well, I mean, that that you're confident that, I mean, look, Pete Rose in his grave probably believes he's being inducted into the Hall of Fame right now.
I don't know about that.
I mean, he probably thinks that eventually the world is going to bend itself around his will, even posthumously, and he's going to get what he wants. And it didn't make it better either that at no point, sincerely, even post Fay Vincent, I mean, here into the 21st century, Pete Rose signing autographs in a Vegas casino or Vegas hotel still never really sincerely fessed up, owned up, reformed himself, never gave the narrative that would have endeared him to not only the league itself, but to Hall of Fame voters.
He never really did show a true contrition. Never gave anyone a chance to soften their eyes against him, even a little bit.
It's a character flaw, like a deep, ugly character flaw. But then again, I think like what I mean by Poznansky is generous with his legacy is he says, was he obstinate? Yes. Was he borderline maniacal, like psychotic kind of? Well, he doesn't say that. I do. But yeah, it's true. Like, was he difficult? Was he oppositional defiance disorder? Yes. Was he all these things? Yes. But then again, if he wasn't, he wouldn't be Pete Rose.
No, he wouldn't. It appears to be what made Pete.
That pattern follows itself around, not just in baseball or other professional sports, but in so many people who are hyper successful and hyper competitive. They have these other elements, which are the realistic underside, the other shape to greatness. And you see it all the time in Major League Baseball players. They come from families that they have issues with their father. And a lot of the time, these people's obsession with success and greatness manifests itself in becoming poor husbands, spending their fortunes.
The tunnel vision is so extreme and so focused that you sacrifice maybe not intentionally, but inadvertently, you're giving something else up, whether it's a good family life or, whatever it may be. All right, so I'm going to downshift here as we start to wrap this segment up. So Pete is sitting here at number 60 on the Poznanski 100. And we've said it before, Leroy. To be in the top 100, you have to be in the Hall of Fame. That's like the first benchmark. I don't think we need to reconcile the fact that Pete Rose is an exception to that rule, right? I mean, what do you think?
Does he belong in the Hall of Fame? Does he belong in the book? Absolutely. He's one of the greatest baseball players, exciting baseball players, as we mentioned already, one of the biggest baseball personalities, one of the most notable, recognizable baseball figures with a killer nickname, Charlie Hustle.
Yes.
So does he belong in the book? Absolutely. Does he belong in the Hall of Fame? What do you think, John?
Well, I agree he belongs in the book. He's easily a top 100 guy. Hall of Fame, obviously, it's something that's it's going to be debatable for a very long time, unless they decide to put him in, and then the debate will be over. But regardless of what happens, Pete Rose is one of those guys whose names will live forever. Even if he never reaches the Hall of Fame, he's a baseball immortal.
Yeah, for a personality like Pete, I think the consolation here is even though he's not in the Hall of Fame, sometimes being infamous brings just along as much notoriety as being famous. It puts you in an outlier class that Pete Rose certainly belongs in. So I think whether or not he ends up in the Hall of Fame or not, or whether you believe he belongs there or not, I think Pete Rose got what he created for himself, which is the legend of Pete, unrelenting, uncompromising, unyielding, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's a victory for Pete, if you want to look at it that way. No one's ever going to forget him, whether he's in the Hall of Fame or not.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Okay, before we close the book on Pete Rose, we do have one fact check correction. Earlier we had said Fay Vincent put the ban on Pete Rose, but it was actually Bart Giamatti that did it about 1 week before he passed away. So Giamatti put the ban on, and Fay Vincent, who was not getting along with Pete during the entire negotiation process that summer, he upheld the ban.
Okay.
For more segments like this, check out our full episodes on any podcast platform. We are the Baseball Book Club. Thanks for listening.